So it's actually a question that I get asked quite a bit. Which languages are spoken most in Texas? And this is something that a lot of people don't even think about. In this video, I'm going to dive into that just a little bit. So obviously the first two major languages in Texas, English and Spanish, for sure. There's no doubt about it. If you know English, if you know Spanish, you're going to be able to make it pretty well almost anywhere you go. I would say that knowing Spanish is a real help. Of course, knowing English is critical, right? Because it's the native language. It's the national language of Texas, if you will. But knowing Spanish will help you a lot. And I think also you need to understand that there's a difference between Castilian Spanish and definitely the Tex-Mex Spanish that we have here. It's often referred to as Spanglish. And it varies differently even from the California Spanish slightly. But yeah, knowing English, knowing Spanish, that'll take you a long way. But there are some other languages that are real popular in Texas, and you're starting to see them come about a little bit more, especially as Texas enters the global marketplace. So the third most common language in Texas, believe it or not, is Vietnamese. Now, Texas has a very significant Vietnamese community in cities like Houston and Dallas. And like I say, this is the third most common language found in the state of Texas next to English and Spanish. You generally find it along the coast in some of the fishing communities, the engineering community. You'll see a lot of Vietnamese being spoken. Quite a good amount in Galveston, Houston, that region, Rockport, Port Aransas, or Aransas Pass, you'll find some, mainly along the coast. But Dallas does have a significant Vietnamese population as well. So the third most common language in Texas, believe it or not, is Vietnamese. So with the growing Asian population here in Texas, certainly Chinese is right up there with the other languages. Mainly Mandarin and Cantonese, of course, both are really predominant languages found here in Texas. You're going to mainly find that in Houston, Dallas, and Austin. But you can find it a little bit in San Antonio, some out in Lubbock because of Texas Tech. But mainly around the universities. But you are seeing Cantonese and Mandarin Chinese becoming very common here in Texas. So the next language on our list actually comes from a very prominent population here in Texas, and that's Filipino Tagalog. Tagalog is a very common language because we do have a good, robust Filipino community here in Texas, particularly in the urban centers. And that makes Tagalog a fairly broad language here in Texas. And again, you're going to find these languages specifically probably in the bigger cities, not in the smaller towns, certainly dominated more by English and Spanish. But Tagalog is widely spoken within a lot of the major cities. So the next few languages that I've decided to put here on my list are less prominent, but you do find them quite a bit here. And the next one is German, because Texas does have some German roots, especially in places like Fredericksburg, New Braunfels, Bernie, parts of the Texas Hill Country. You'll see German still spoken quite widely. It's a common language more in the central Texas suburban locations, if you will. But you do still see pockets of German being spoken here in Texas. There are some dialects of Arabic that are spoken here in Texas. You see a little bit of Farsi being spoken around Houston, somewhat in Dallas, but you're starting to see a growing Arabic population to a lesser extent than other places throughout the country. But there are some pockets of the Arabic language, mainly in the bigger cities, Houston, Dallas. You see it a lot in the medical center area of Houston. not uncommon at all. So the Arabic languages are pretty common in Texas for sure. Next language on the list is French, and that's mainly spoken from our Africans, Haitians, and people that come from French-speaking regions of the world, as well as the descendants of the Cajuns and the Creoles near the Louisiana border. You do see French a little bit, and obviously there's different dialects of French no matter where you go. This is probably not the same French that you would get in Paris or somewhere like this, but you do see it fairly often. French is certainly on the map as far as languages here in Texas. We've talked a little bit about the Southeast Asian community here in Texas, and it's a very robust community. With that, you see a little bit of Urdu coming here into our language. Again, Houston, Dallas, a little bit in Austin. But Urdu is definitely a language you're starting to hear people speak more and more often here in Texas, especially as we reach out to global workforces in places like South Asia. So yeah, you can, especially in the tech community in and around Austin, Urdu is definitely very common. Another thing that I think you would pick up on too is in Fort Bend County near Houston, Hindi is very common. You hear that a lot, and a lot of people say that Urdu and Hindi are very closely related, and they are. But definitely you do hear a lot of Hindi in places like Rosenberg and Fort Bend County on the western outskirts of Houston. Places like Dallas and Houston, the Korean population is very robust. It's a good, strong population. But Korean certainly on the list, especially in the medical community. You have a lot of recruiting going on overseas, especially in South Korea and the Philippines, but mostly in South Korea. They're trying to bring in the nurses and the doctors and things like that from South Korea. So definitely there's a pretty significant, anywhere you see a strong medical community like Houston or Dallas, you're going to see Korean language on the radar for sure. To some lesser extent, there's some of the indigenous languages that are spoken here in Texas, things like Navajo. That's spoken in much smaller numbers, but they do still preserve that tradition, mainly within their own culture. You do see some of the indigenous languages still very much alive here in Texas, though to a much smaller extent. So did any of these languages surprise you that they're common here in Texas? Texas is a growing international workforce, much like Dubai in the UAE. But Texas is a growing workforce. We're the 8th largest economy in the world if we were our own country. So Texas has a very diverse workforce and a very diverse population. No doubt there's a lot of different languages spoken there. Is there a language that's common in your part of Texas, in your neighborhood? Maybe it's Czech, maybe it's German, maybe it's Polish even. There's a lot of Polish speakers down here where I live in South Texas. What's common in your neck of the woods? Drop me a comment and let's talk about this, because I think it's very interesting to see what languages are spoken in the different regions of Texas and what we're seeing become more common or less common. I'd like to know your comments. Thanks for joining me. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and share this information, this video. Hopefully it's been inspiring and informative to you. All right, we'll see you in the next one. Take care.